Welcome to Studio 58A Live here at the Jamaica Information Service, our discussion program coming to you live on Facebook. I'm your host, Vaughn Davis. Thank you to everyone joining us online wherever you are around the world. We really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for your eyes. And like we have your attention, do us a favor, now, man. Share this video with a friend or 2 or 5,000 so we can have a very lively discussion. Now, as you watch, remember to send in your question and a comment so we can put them to our guests. Now, people, guess what? Today is World Wildlife Day 2022. What does that mean? It means it's time for all of us to stop for a moment and appreciate all the different plants, animals, insects, and the like that we have here in Jamaica, right? To appreciate all the natural beauty that makes Jamaica the island paradise that it is. You know many different species of plants and animals that are only found right here in Jamaica? Me neither. But that is why we have the National Environment and Planning Agency, NEPA, and we have 2 guests from NEPA to share all the details about the steps being taken to protect our wildlife in Jamaica and explain why World Wildlife Day should be something on all of our radars. We have with us Environmental Officer and bona fide crocodile wrangler, Treya Picking, and Coordinator in the Fauna Ecosystems Management Branch, Ricardo Miller. We also have Dr. Carl Aiken. Let me make sure I get that right. Chair of Ecosystems Management Branch, right? We also have Dr. Carl Aiken, Chair of the Scientific Authority of Jamaica. We have a well-rounded panel that's going to give us all the information we need to know about Jamaica's wildlife, what we should be doing to protect it, how we can play a part as citizens, as individuals. So it should be a very interesting discussion today. Welcome to all of my panelists. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining me. They're all muted. Feel free to unmute, guys. I'm done with the bag of land talking part of the show today.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Bob. It's good to be here.
Yes. Pleasure to be here.
All right. I'm going to start with you, Ricardo. Can you just give me a brief idea of World Wildlife Day? Some background on what does World Wildlife Day seek to accomplish around the world?
So, World Wildlife Day is actually coming out of the convention, CITES Convention. That's a convention on international trade in endangered species. And Dr. Carl Aiken, who's here with us, is actually the chair of the scientific authority for CITES here in Jamaica. He'll be able, I'm sure when he comes in, he'll give a longer introduction about the whole day. But the World Wildlife Day came about back in 2013. CITES being a UN convention, they decided they needed a signature day for CITES, and March 3rd was chosen as a signatory day from 2013 onwards to celebrate, species that are threatened, species that are endangered, and to bring the whole awareness around the world as to the importance of species and their habitats.
All right. Well, with that said, Dr. Aiken, let me just bring you in right away then. Talk to me a little bit more about World Wildlife Day, what it seeks to accomplish, and, some of the more, I guess, from where you sit, what are some of the considerations that went into making this day a much more appreciated, I guess, in Jamaica here?
Well, my angle is from CITES, the scientific authority, which I have the privilege to chair for the last 3 years or so, but I was a member for, 22 years. We are really concerned with trade, international trade in species of endangered flora and fauna, as Ricardo said. And as Ricardo mentioned, World Wildlife Day is a United Nations strategy, a decision that was made in 2013, where the 3rd day of the 3rd month of each year will be designated around the world as International or United Nations World Wildlife Day. And it's, as he was saying, it's a day to recognize the value of the natural bounty of each country. All the democratic countries of the world have signed on to the United Nations Charter, and Jamaica is a member and a signatory, and therefore we definitely have to observe the rules and the conditions that relate to World Wildlife Day. And it's a day to, I suppose, to showcase our resources such as they are, and to highlight any special conservation programs that we might have. This is really the purview of NEPA. CITES really focuses on trade, movement between countries in species that are threatened or endangered. For instance, one of the things that we're looking at now is the trade in the movement of dolphins, and also the regulation of the pet trade in Jamaica, and also trying to improve the profile. Let's not forget the plants on which just about everything is dependent for oxygen and so forth. We're trying to improve the conservation profile of Lignum vitae, which is the tree that bears our national flower. These are some of the little programs we have within the CITES Scientific Authority that impinge on our natural resources, both animals and plants. You know, we tend to highlight the exotic things like what Treya and Ricardo deal with, like crocodiles, you know, because, you know, can bite people and all of that. But, you know, the trees, unless a tree branch drop on your head, they don't really notice you. So the trees are not to be forgotten, because some of them are very valuable for timber, like Lignum vitae. It's the hardest wood in the world, most dense wood in the world by international tests. And we have found that the population of this species could be diminishing. We need to do a proper survey soon. But anyway, I'll hand over to the others and not say too much at this point.
All right, we're going to stick up in because we want to come back to that very interesting topic about the regulation of the animals and plants and so on, and in a much more detailed way. So Plan Jamaica is online with 2 questions. Plan Jamaica, love the questions already. You're kind of preempting where I want to carry my discussion, so just hold on for a little bit longer before I get to ask these questions that you have in there. So there are already 2 questions, guys. I'm gonna give me 1 second before I ask those 2 questions. All right, Plan Jamaica, don't hold it against me, don't bat me up. I soon ask them. All right. I just want let me talk to Treya now. Treya, talk to me a little bit about, give me a snapshot of Jamaica's wildlife. Jamaica is island paradise. That's what everybody thinks. Everything is just, we have so many, the place is just beautiful, naturally beautiful, all kinds of plants, animals, and so on. It's just lovely to look at. Is that just like what you would call like a rose-colored look at things, in the sense that we just don't really, we're not paying, we just think it look nice and beautiful, but there are lots of other things that we need to be aware of so that it will stay beautiful? So what are some of the things that we should be aware of, and, you know, as far as Jamaica's wildlife is concerned? And just give me an idea what what we should be thinking about here.
Okay, so Jamaica is a very special island. For such a small tropical island, we have a very high level of endemism. And when we talk about endemism, we talk about plants and animal species that are only found here. So if they get wiped out in Jamaica, they're no longer going to exist on this planet. And so as humans living, on this planet and living here in Jamaica, we have, a connection with our environment. Our environment is very, very important, because our wildlife, which we don't see a lot of it, they play very important roles in the ecosystem. They keep the ecosystems healthy, they keep our surroundings healthy, and we depend on these services for our livelihoods. And so we as humans do have this important role, which, we're trying to stress the importance of it, of being stewards of our environment and taking care of it. And it starts from simple things like not throwing out your plastic bottle or piece of trash onto the roadside, which ends up in the gullies, and then it ends up in the sea, and it ends up impacting the marine wildlife and, polluting our environment, to not troubling and harassing wildlife like our crocodiles, keeping protected parrots as pets, and overfishing, catching small fish in the sea instead of throwing them back. Just simple actions play a very big role in how we care for our environment and how we impact our environment. And so part of the reason we do what we do is to try and reduce the impacts that we have on our environment by educating people, by doing research on our wildlife to see how they're doing and how threats that humans are causing are affecting them, affecting their population numbers, and just raising awareness about it. So there's a lot to say about, you know, how we treat our environment and how important a healthy healthy ecosystems are to our livelihoods. And so yeah.
All right, fantastic. We're going to stick up in. We're going to come back to that in a more detailed way, but I like to make sure I loop in the persons who have comments and questions online. Remember, we're here talking about World Wildlife Day 2022, the theme of which is recovering key species for ecosystem restoration. That's just very fancy and so on in a way of saying that we make sure that we preserve the animals that we have, so that we can continue enjoying them and they can continue making their various contributions to the sustainability of our natural environment over the long term. We can't kill off the different animals them and then expect that the country and is going to remain naturally beautiful. We can't kill off the trees, can't kill off the animals, the insects, and so on and so forth. We have to make sure that even as much as we enjoy them, we can't just lick down that green area to build a housing scheme and then act surprised when animals and plants get displaced and that affects the environment. It's a whole cyclical thing, but we're going to go deeper into that. But Ricardo, because we have two questions here online, I'm just going to shoot them over to you. First one is from Plan Jamaica, is asking, please say how we can include more wildlife in the vast urban areas such as Port Municipality and Kingston and Montego Bay. And hi, any update on the NEPA Act being promulgated? So two questions there. I don't know if you can offer an answer on either one of those.
Okay, I'll start with the first question, and I actually like that question. I have a colleague of mine who is really, really interested in that, and we have dialogues all the time. The question, how can we incorporate more wildlife and appreciation within our cities? And on a good note, Kingston, to start with, is a very green city. If you've ever been higher up in the Blue Mountains and looking down at Kingston, or have the chance to visit other places in the world, you'll realize that Kingston is a rather green city. And if we want to incorporate more wildlife within our cities, that's where we need to start, to ensure that we have a lot of green space, that we encourage the planting of trees in parks, even along the roadways. And so, we've had a lot of developments happening in Kingston. And we've had road expansion. In some instances, we've seen where large trees were removed. And we are of the belief that if we're able to adopt a policy where we can look at retaining more of that while still achieving the development goals that we want, we can see that wildlife remains within the limits of the city. Now, the main wildlife that we have that is quite visible, especially in an urban setting, are our birds, right? Birds rely on trees. If you've ever been in the Mona area, if you've ever been in Hope Gardens area, you would be really, really astonished at the amount of bird life of parrots, seeing parrots, not just one or two, but flocks of our native parrots flying around. So in an essence, Kingston is not doing too bad in the fact that we already had some well-established green space, and we're actually very close to some really high biodiversity areas, such as the Blue Mountains. Over in St. Catherine, the situation is a little different. Whereas St. Catherine, well, not just St. Catherine, Portmore, let's stick to Portmore. Portmore has a rather drier climate in terms of rainfall. If Portmore going over into Hellshire, you'll notice it starts seeing a lot of cacti. This doesn't mean that it is something bad. That is just how it is naturally. And there is still a lot of wildlife because guess what? We have a lot of wetlands there. And my colleague Treya will tell you that she does a lot of work in the Portmore area, in the Hellshire area, as it relates to one particular species, that really resides in those wetlands. And that's the American crocodile, which we have here in Jamaica, which is really threatened. And so we actually been working with the Portmore municipality to put up signage, because this species is a species, while we want to conserve it, we have to also recognize the concerns of citizens and the fact that it is potentially a dangerous animal. So we have to find that balance where people and animal can coexist, right? And so we work with municipality to ensure that the drains are being cleaned regularly and water is not backed up in drains in places like Portmore, because that is what would, cause crocodiles and so forth to be coming up, closer to people. So in a sense, let me just finish off on that question. We're not doing too bad as in terms of wildlife within those two areas that the caller asked about. We can do a lot more to ensure that we are protecting these areas. We're not having people going in to cut down the mangroves, for example, because that would open up the area and cause the animals to be displaced. And that is when we start to have problems. Now, over to the second question, which he asked about the NEPA Act. Now, it's a pity I don't have my legal colleagues with me who can probably give the better update on that. But as it is, as far as I know, that is still something in the pipeline. It has not yet been declared. It is still something in the pipeline. Right now, NEPA is operating under the NRCA Act, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Authority Act, which, by the way, is a very powerful act in the country to regulate our natural resources, our wildlife, our forests, and developments across the island.
All right, so you hear that Plan Jamaica. Ricardo just went through and gave a nice answer to your question. If you have any more questions, don't hesitate, drop them in the comments, and I would encourage everybody else tuning into our discussion to drop some comments as well. Let's know what you think about Jamaica's wildlife, anything you want to know, anything you're interested in, any way you can play a part in helping to preserve and sustain our whole environment, our natural environment. We want to hear from you, and we have the persons here who can give you some technical expertise, who can answer any question that you might have. All right, so don't feel hesitant at all. Just drop us any question and we'll look into it as we go forward with the show. Now, I'm going to go a little bit further, but I want to look at the different programs and so on that we've been undertaking to preserve Jamaica's environment, because I know there are a range of them, so we can take a few of them and look through them. But even as we do that, so Dr. Aiken, you're on deck after. I'm going to start with Treya, then you're on deck to talk to me about the particular issue of how we're in Jamaica, we're working to protect Jamaica from, persons bringing in these illegal animals and so on, because that in itself sounds very interesting when I go into that. But for Treya, I want to start with you. Talk to me about the animal, I guess, that you have become associated with in Jamaica as the croc wrangler. I mean, you would never know it, but talk to me about some of the different work and so on, as the efforts that's been going into preserving Jamaica's crocodile.
Okay, so yeah, the crocodile. It's a very special animal, very close to my heart. So
literally, quite literally.
Yeah. So with the conservation and management of any wildlife, it's really, really important to conduct research on them so we have an idea of how they're doing. And then we can improve our conservation and management strategies in order to protect the species. So with the American crocodile, when I first started out at NEPA, I noticed, there was a lot being done in terms of rescue and response, monitoring, and enforcement and awareness. But what had not happened in Jamaica was a completed island-wide or up-to-date survey on the population. And because they're very misunderstood, we have threats such as illegal hunting, we have habitat loss and fragmentation, we have indiscriminate killings, the illegal pet trade, believe it or not, it's really impacting the species. And so
illegal pet trade. Who has a pet crocodile in Jamaica?
You don't want to know. It's a real issue. Like, we do get quite a lot of cases of reports of people keeping crocodiles of all sizes. I mean, it can vary from, some kids going crab hunting and coming across a baby crocodile, a hatchling, and deciding to carry it home and try and keep it as a pet. Or someone keeping a 10-foot crocodile in their backyard. For what reason, I do not know. So it can be, it is a real issue. And it's one of the many threats that is contributing towards the species decline. So with all of that, I decided to pursue my research in the crocodile as part of my master's at UWI. And so I started a collaborative project, which is between NEPA, the University of the West Indies, and the University of Florida Croc Docs, to conduct an island-wide survey on the population. And this involves going out at night and basically shining flashlights along rivers, along mangrove swamps, even in sewage ponds, and counting crocodiles. Because they're most active at night and the flashlights reflect off their eyes. So they're very easy to identify during these hours. And so that has been going on since July 2020, and we are coming to an end now. And so we have some really, really exciting results. And we've gotten some really, really cool information island-wide on how the crocs are doing, how they're utilizing their habitat, how they coexist with the different communities, and how they're doing as well in terms of their health. And so we'll be taking all of this data, I'll be analyzing it, and from there, we can kind of create an even stronger conservation plan to help with the management of our crocodiles. And one place that is very special to me is Portmore. It's a very interesting case study because, you know, Portmore is this area that has a diverse wetland network, which consists of both artificial wetlands, such as the sewage ponds, and natural wetlands, such as the Great Salt Pond, the Flashes, and so on. And so the crocodiles like this area a lot. And because it's, you know, human, it's heavily populated, we do get the highest amount of interactions there. So this would be a community that we look into, especially to try and reduce the negative interactions and see how best we can manage the population and people can coexist. Yeah, so it's very, very interesting. But also one of the other threats I forgot to mention is people feeding crocodiles, and that's also something that we're really, really trying to strongly advise against, because our crocs naturally are very shy and reclusive animals, but when people start to feed them, they're just like, oh, that's a human. They may have food. Let me swim towards them instead of swimming away. And so from that type of interaction, from that type of behavior, it can create very dangerous situations for people. And that's where we could possibly have attacks, which is not good. It's not good for us, and it's not good for the species and its protection.
It's curious you mentioned that, because one of the questions that we just got in online from Wildlife Jamaica, thank you, Wildlife Jamaica, really appreciate the question, is how can we change Jamaica's perception of wildlife from kill it to live with it? Which suggests, well, one of the things you can do is stop feeding the wildlife, because once they start, you feed them. If you feed any animal, it will start coming around because it sees you as a consistent source of food. And then a person will come through. You might see a person, assume it's friendly, get an unfriendly reception, and then before you know it, they have some kind of situation and they have to come call Treya to take the crocodile off of you or something like that. We don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
We don't want that. So that's one of the ways. So we're going to explore that topic a little bit more as we go further. But Dr. Aiken, I'm going to stick up in 1 second because there's one other thing I wanted to ask Ricardo about, and we're going to come back to the trafficking and illegal animals and so on. I want to talk about the world famous iguana resettlement program that NEPA is known, and NEPA, I guess, participates with works alongside to help one of our indigenous species, the iguanas, which is up in the Hellshire Hills. And we've been able to start, I guess, rebuilding the population in a way to make sure that we can, you know, keep that particular animal alive and well, going well into the future. So talk to me about that, Ricardo.
Okay, so you started out quite nicely. The Jamaican iguana, it's not the green lizard that people see on tree. It's not, you know, anything that you see in around your neighborhood. The Jamaican iguana is actually a true iguana species that can actually grow to about 6 feet long. You know, it's really big. And this species was thought to have gone extinct in Jamaica. And then it was rediscovered. It was rediscovered around 1990 by a pig hunter up in the Hellshire Hills, where he was going with his dogs, and his dogs cornered. You know, it's a famous story. The dog cornered this animal, and, you know, they caught it, they brought it back to the zoo. You know, they contacted the University of the West Indies, and the late Dr. Peter Vogel, you know, went and immediately knew what it was. He did an expedition in the Hellshire Hills and found the last remaining population of the Jamaican iguana. And, you know, the initial surveys showed that there were only a few adults. They only seen a few adults in the forest, and they immediately realized that the younger ones were the ones that were most threatened. They were eaten by mongoose, they were eaten by cats, they were eaten by dogs, And so exotic mammalian predators were one of the main causes for the decline of the species. And so in 1990, when it was rediscovered, under the influence of Dr. Peter Vogel, in association with the Hope Zoo and the NRC at the time, they started the Jamaica Iguana Recovery Group with the aim to rebuild the population of this rather unique species in the island. It is classified as critically endangered. And I want you to pay attention to that word, critically endangered. And this means that if there is no intervention by us humans, the species would be totally lost in a very short time. And so recognizing that, the Jamaica Iguana Recovery Group started a program called a Head Start program. It wasn't a breeding program, right? We didn't catch them and breed them and release. It's a Head Start program. And the difference is we allow the species to breed naturally in the wild, in Hellshire Hills, and then we collected the young ones and we protected them. We grew them to what I call a formidable size, a size where it can fend for itself, keep off the mongoose, keep off the cat, and then we re-release them back into the wild. And, you know, we've been doing this from 1990 onwards, and we've been reaping a lot of success. We have international partners that have joined us. You know, we're getting funding from overseas. We're getting, you know, funding locally through NEPA, and we're getting the assistance of the Hope Zoo. And so it's a very vibrant program. And this year, if my memory serves me right, has marked where we've released over 500 back into the wild. You know, coming from just seeing a few adults, we now have released over 500. Not all of them are still alive because, you know, they will die again, you know, eventually. But this is a milestone, and it is actually one of those good stories, you know, feel-good stories, one of those stories that is globally recognized, that Jamaican iguana is actually doing pretty well because of the recovery program that we've implemented.
All right. So two quick comments coming in online from Travis Bartley saying, great job on the surveys, Treya. It's important that we know the population. Because, you know, it's a better ask to somebody beginning you up. And Longville Park say, occasionally we glanced West Indian whistling duck in sections of southern Clarendon. Is there any work being done by NEPA to help this beautiful duck? Stick a pin, because I'm going to talk to Dr. Aiken now. I know he has to leave shortly, so we want to make sure we capitalize and maximize on what he has to share. So Dr. Aiken, this, and because I mean, it's important and it ties into protecting our wildlife, because if you introduce a lot of foreign species in Jamaica, who knows the impact that can have, what kind of animal disease they could have. They could come in here and be some kind of predator or something to some one of our local species and cause that one to die out. And so talk to me about the work that is being done from your end and from the organization on which you sit to help preserve and protect Jamaica's fauna, flora, wild environment, and so on and so forth.
Sure. I would say that we're not necessarily in the front line like the two young people I'm sharing the panel with, Mr. Miller and Ms. Picking, but we prefer to stay in the background and we review and advise. And one of the things that has kept our attention for, ever since I was a member of the scientific authority, and certainly in the last 3 years I was chair, is the queen conch. No, what the heck is queen conch? Queen conch is a marine gastropod. It's a snail, but it's also very edible, and it's under a lot of fishing pressure around the world. Related species in most of the world have been wiped out, and Jamaica has the last remaining large population, and we want to keep it that way for a long time. So the scientific authority's role in that, along working closely with the NFA, the National Fisheries Authority, that is in the front line. They're in the front line. We're the backup, sort of semi-legal backup. The queen conch since 1982 has been what is called a CITES Appendix 2 species. Now we have 3 appendices. Appendix 3 are those that need a little attention, but you just can regulate their movement and trade and so forth locally. Appendix 2 is where they are endangered, and they're endangered to the point where you have to closely monitor their trade and do annual surveys. And Appendix 1 is that they're so endangered that there's no trade allowed anywhere between countries. And anybody who is found with an Appendix 1 creature is to be arrested because they've broken international law and, of course, local laws as well. So back to the Queen Kong. We have a small fishery that has done pretty well for almost 30 years. It started in the early 1990s, and it takes place on Pedro Bank, which is a large offshore bank, about the 2/3 the size of Jamaica, about, I'd say about 100 kilometers south of Kingston. So what CITES does is oversees the quotas and the closed season and the number of applicants that try to enter this fishery each year. And what we do is we review the scientific soundness of the survey data that the NFA offers to us to review, to give our stamp of approval. CITES is very much a part of this because the trade documents that allow movement of Appendix 2 animals has to be approved by CITES. If you have a 40-foot container full of this precious cargo and you want to send it from Kingston to, say, Miami, where there's a small market there, you have to have your local documentation, but moreover, your CITES your CITES trade documents. Many years ago, there was not very good observation of these rules here in Jamaica by certain big fishers. And they sent off several 40-foot containers full of this stuff in the early 90s when it was started. Well, the CITES authorities, who are part of the customs arrangement in Miami, seized them. And by the time they hustled and got the documents together, which they should have had in the first instance, those containers with $5 million worth of product was rotten. But you see, since that event took place, everybody make sure that their documents are in place. So the idea is that CITES is an international organization, you know, it's not a local thing. So it carries a lot of international clout. And I'll just end by saying that if you, quote unquote, misbehave, and the country repeatedly has traders who don't fill up their documents properly or operate conch processing facilities that are not up to scratch, the country is blacklisted for up to 5 years in which there is no trade allowed. And you might say, well, it's just some little snail. No, we earn between 5 and 8 million US per year in the season that we call the conch season, which is a conch fishing season of about 5 months per year. The rest of the time, there's a closed season where no fishing is allowed. So over the period of time, we've earned about $300 or $400 million US from this industry. It earns more than the coffee industry, but don't tell the minister that, okay?
Okay. All right, Dr. Aiken. I know you had mentioned before that you might. If you do have to leave, don't worry. You can just dip out if necessary and so on. But thanks so much for being here when necessary, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up again and talk about this topic even further. Okay. All right, 5 million US is not chicken feed. That's right. Knowing how to make sure we preserve this and in a balanced way so that there's actual conch to reap from the year, next year and the year after and so on and so forth makes sense. So that's another part of preserving our wildlife. All right. Which brings me now to a question, Ricardo. I want to talk to you about enforcement and legislation to protect the different species and so on that we have. How do we protect them? What measures do we have within country to ensure that persons who are abusing our wildlife, abusing our natural environment are, brought to book? We have them, necessary punishment and so on,
Okay, so any part of a conservation effort would have to have enforcement involved. There's a research part where Treya is dealing with, and there's an enforcement part, because if people are not following the rules, there has to be consequences. The main law that we have here in Jamaica is the Wildlife Protection Act, right? The Wildlife Protection Act, which came about in 1945, looks at protecting mainly our animal species, right? We think of the crocodile, for example, we think of marine turtles, we think of birds. All of our native birds are protected, for example, all of them. Once it's found natural in the forest in Jamaica, they are protected, right? All native birds are protected. And under this act, the Wildlife Protection Act, you can be fined up to $100,000 or up to 12 months imprisonment, right? And, you might think that is not much. And I also think that. But, these fines have been the subject of review recently. And so we are looking to start to increase the fines under this act, because, when we lose species or habitats or, protected animals, quantifying it in monetary terms is never adequate, right? Because we lose so much, we lose parts of our natural heritage and so forth. But the second act that helps to protect our species that I would like to mention is the Endangered Species Act. And this act is actually tied in with CITES, which Dr. Aiken just spoke about. So CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Once Jamaica signed up to that convention, we now have to we have to put certain things in place. One was to put together a scientific authority, which Dr. Carl Aiken is a chair, and then we have to pass local laws that would address these international concerns. And so the Endangered Species Act is our local law to look at the international trade of endangered species. So if someone is trading in, let's look at Queen Conch again, without going through the various processes, and they are, doing illegal trade, it wouldn't necessarily be charged only under the Wildlife Protection Act, which carries a fine of $100,000, but under the Endangered Species Act, where we're looking at least $2 million in terms of fine and, longer prison terms if necessary. So the Endangered Species Act is our second main legislation that deals with this. Now, in terms of enforcement, there is, I would say, an enforcement network involving NEPA, involving customs, involving our marine police, involving Coast Guard, looking at, and the police in general, looking at wildlife species, looking at possession of these animals, those who have it without permits, and so forth. So those are the main acts and main legislation that we have in place.
All right, great. So work is being done. All right, so who does the actual enforcement? Is that the police coming and arrest these people, or is NEPA are the ones who go out and do the enforcement exactly?
Well, NEPA has an enforcement team, and the enforcement team looks at not just wildlife, but development and so forth. But we work very closely with the constabulary force when we're doing enforcement actions as it relates to wildlife. And in some cases, the police are out doing a patrol. And as Treya mentioned, someone might have a 10-foot crocodile as a pet in their backyard, which has happened. And the police, would immediately know that that is not supposed to happen. And they call us and they wait on site, and we come and we take the animal, we release it back into the wild. And of course, we deal with the paperwork in terms of charging these persons and so forth. So it's a little bit of both, mainly NEPA, but of course, with the assistance of the police.
All right. So Travis L. Bartley, who had talked and sent it a question before, had asked how many iguanas had been released so far under the Head Start program. Also, bigging up for the Head Start program as well. You had mentioned that it was 500 over the time period.
It's 542.
542.
542. All right, there we go.
Yeah.
Wildlife Jamaica is asking, how do we get more regulations for things like size limits for fish or harvesting crabs during the breeding season without persons feeling like they're being fought out? So how do we do that? How do we, it's a thing, because most people look to the natural environment and these different species as a source of economic, money. They get money, survivability, they, all these kinds of things. And so there's this delicate balance that has to be struck between harvesting them and selling them or using them for whatever purpose that they have, but at the same time ensuring that they stay alive so that you can have some for the next season and the season after that and so on. But not everybody have conscience, unfortunately. And so you find that, so how does NEPA work to help strike that balance? And what are some of the tips you can share for persons who might have you might not necessarily be an environmentalist like you guys, but has an interest in making sure that these species do remain and that we do get to enjoy them going forward?
Okay, you want me to take that one again, Treya? All right, let me go. So
I can take part of it.
You want to take part of it?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
All right, Treya,
I would, on the awareness side, in terms of trying to improve certain measures to, say, conserve land crabs and fish stocks, it would definitely be, it's very, very important. It's critical to help people understand why measures like that would be important, because you can implement a certain law, a certain legislation, and if the people on the ground do not see that it's important and why it benefits them and their children and future generations in the long run, then it's good. You're going to have a hard time with it actually being enforcing it and it actually being effective. So like with NEPA, we work with various NGOs in terms of like fish populations. That would be more on fisheries side, but we do work with other government agencies very, very closely to try and improve try and improve in management strategies for wildlife species. And so that would be the key aim, would be definitely public education and outreach before you then implement something like that. And it also starts with research. So we actually did some land crab research. We did like some questionnaires to see when people are harvesting them, what time of the year, how many. And so we have that information in-house, and we can now move forward to look into laws, to look into outreach activities, and see how we could go about trying to improve the management of land crabs when it comes to the season, the land crab seasons.
Right. And I would add, Treya, that in terms of fisheries, yes, the fisheries authority is the main body that actually looks at all the issues related to fisheries. But I would like to talk about the protected area system, whereas we do have quite a lot of fish sanctuaries that have been designated across the island. And we're starting to see an improvement in fish stock. We now have, so let me talk about the fish sanctuaries. We have areas where no fishing is allowed. And in most cases, we have an NGO that manages that area. And when you go into these areas, you're starting to see big fish again. And these areas are now seeding the surrounding areas where people are fishing with new fish stock and so forth. And so through this protected area system, that is one way in which we can improve on our fisheries stock. The person who asked the question, Wildlife Jamaica, talk about fish sites. Now, that is something that is well established, especially in more developed countries like the US. If you're fishing, you can be pulled over by a ranger who checks the size of your fish, make sure it is something like that. And the fisheries authority is looking into things like that. But there is this tradition of how we actually fish that is makes it a little challenging, because a lot of our fisheries is done with fish pots, and those sometimes are a little indiscriminatory. But we try to emphasize mesh size, for example, to ensure that really small fish are not taken. So there are some challenges, but there are steps that are already being taken.
All right, let me switch tack with both of you guys for something now. Invasive species, because balancing our wildlife naturally has to deal with the fact that there are other species that come from foreign countries. And then it first begs the question, how them reach over here? And second of all, one person just walked in a while ago and asked me about one that's becoming quite topical, the Cuban tree frog. Talk to me about the wider issue itself of invasive species and how that comes into protecting our local wildlife and making sure that our endemic species remain and so on and so forth.
Okay, I'll start this one off, Treya. So let's make sure we're clear what an invasive species is. So we usually talk about alien invasive species. So an alien invasive species is a species that is not from a particular area, and its presence is actually having detrimental effects on the ecosystems and the species within. So we think about species that were introduced, whether intentionally or unintentionally, into an area, and the population has exploded because once it's taken from its natural area, you find that it doesn't have the same checks and balances in this new area. It doesn't have the predator pressure. You know, what usually feed on it to keep its population down is not there. It might have increased food resources. So food is now plentiful for it. So its population breeds up and it becomes a problem. Some things we can think of as invasive. One intentional invasive, for example, is the small Indian mongoose, right? The mongoose, which was introduced back in the 1800s. Back then, we were thinking a little differently. It was brought in to control rats on the cane fields, because back in those days, sugar was king. So the plantation owners will do anything, and the government will do anything to protect sugarcane. So they brought in the mongoose to deal with rats on the cane fields. And lo and behold, soon after that mongoose was introduced, we started having decline in populations of snakes, populations of bird, to the point where we actually lost 2 species of bird that were unique to Jamaica. So if the mongoose wasn't here, we probably would have had 31 species of birds that are alive and endemic to Jamaica, but now we only have 29 species because we lost 2. And those 2 were ground nesting birds, one called the Jamaican petrel and one called the Jamaican paraki. And, you know, it's quite easy to understand how that happened. They nest on the ground, the mongoose is always on the ground. Mongoose basically eat them off, right? They eat them off. So we lost those 2 species of birds. We lost at least 1 species of snake, the Jamaican racer, which was a daytime snake that is fairly long, 4 or 5 feet long, and you know, you can see it all over the place. And soon after the mongoose was introduced, this, you know, they're seeing them less and less, to the point that we no longer have that snake on the island. And there are several other species that are impacted like that. And so that is one case of intentional introduction of a species into a new area that eventually became invasive and became a problem. Now, one unintentional introduction, I would say, is the Cuban tree frog. We are not sure how it came in. We're not sure how it came in, but you know, it's a frog. We have even other frogs. The little whistling frog, when you're in the country, you hear a little twing, twing, twing in your flower spot on your veranda in the country. That is actually an introduced species from the Lesser Antilles, you know, Lesser Antillean whistling frog. And those can simply be introduced through potted plants coming in. And that is why we have quarantine systems. And once, you know, if we're not very stringent on these things, we can unintentionally bring in a species, and then all of a sudden it's a problem. The Cuban tree frog, probably 5-6 years ago, we started seeing this little strange frog. And suddenly, here in 2022, all over the South Coast, well, most of the areas of the South Coast, particularly Clarendon, parts of St. Catherine, people are reporting about this tree frog. And its impact is already being seen on the fact, on us humans. You know, most Jamaicans are a little squirmish about frogs and stuff. And once these things are getting in large numbers and getting into people's homes, it becomes a problem. In terms of the wider ecosystem, we do have some frog species here in Jamaica which are native. You know, not the cane toad. The cane toad is a big thing which people call bullfrog, but is really a toad. That's also another invasive species. But we have small frogs, tree frogs, that are in our forests, and we are very concerned because quite a lot of them are endemic. They're only found in Jamaica. We're quite concerned that this new Cuban tree frog will start getting into those areas and start displacing, start out-competing, and eventually lead to these species being critically endangered and maybe even extinct over time. And so that is one of the main reasons why we're so concerned about it. But, you know, these are just 2 examples, but there are so many more. There are, through the illegal pet trade, a lot of things are coming in. You know, we have, and not just illegal pet trade, even the legal pet trade, where there is not that much responsibility on the owners in keeping and managing their pets. We have instances, for example, in Hurricane Gilbert, a lot of pet birds were escaped from large aviaries, privately owned aviaries, and those birds are now established in the wild. There are a few finches and things like that. But some of those are not invasive in the word of invasive. It's not creating a problem per se, but they are alien species. More recently, we've been seeing some parrot species, for example, that are not native to Jamaica. And those are of much more concern for us because we do have 2 endemic parrots, 3 now, 2 parrots and a parakeet. And these new parrots are bigger, these introduced ones that are in the pet trade. Things like the rose ring parakeet or ringneck parakeet, as they would like to call them. The yellow-naped Amazon. Those are now in the wild and breeding in parts of Kingston and St. Andrew. And those we are very concerned about in displacing our native parrots, whether it be nesting areas, whether it be availability of food, and simply just by out competing and beating them up, So we're really concerned about these new invasive parrot species, for example. And just before Dr. Aiken left, he mentioned that the scientific authority is looking into regulation of the pet trade in Jamaica. And that is something that is big on the radar at NEPA and something that we're working towards to get a good hold, not just, and another partner would be the Veterinary Services Division of the Ministry of Agriculture. They're also responsible for providing permits for importation of animals and so forth. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that we manage species, whether it be pets or whether it be things that are coming in for other purposes.
Okay. Now let me, I guess, as I kind of bring things down, there's one thing I want to talk to you about, which is in the same vein as the species, the balance of the species that we have. I don't know who said it to me not so long ago, but somebody was saying that cats are becoming almost like a plague in the country, in the sense that cats are actually attacking and killing a lot of the other different species and so on. I would imagine dogs as well, because people have dogs as pets and so on. They are, I guess I would speculate, they are maybe the most popular or most populous pet animal or animals that are strays or in the wild, that kind of thing. And so naturally that will have an impact on wildlife in a way. So what do you do in a situation like that? Because as cats aren't necessarily eaten for, by other, I don't know, I'm only speculating here, but cats don't necessarily seem like they are eaten for meat by other animals or whatever the case may be. And so they are, and cats breed fast, cats have continuous amounts of litter. And so the question is, how do you look at that balance now with all these stray cats, stray dogs that are coming around now, and they might be having an impact on the survivability of other species across the country? What do you say, Treya?
Well, yeah, so cats are, they are creating a huge problem. Dogs as well, but cats, everyone has a story who has a cat about, a cat bringing home a dead bird in their mouth or a lizard, because they do go outside and they do hunt. And we do in Jamaica have a huge issue with a lot of stray cats and dogs on the road. Even for responsible owners, we do still have the issue of cats and dogs impacting, especially like our surroundings when they're outside and stuff like that. But in terms of like the stray population, it is more trying to manage that. And I know a lot is being done by like the JSPCA, Montego Bay Animal Haven, to work on like, neutering and managing, the pet trade when it does come to cats and dogs, because we do have a real issue, and it's also an animal welfare issue. But touching on more of being a responsible owner, so like there is this kind of new worldwide practice in many countries which encourage people who have cats to keep them indoors, because I don't know the statistics, but the impact that they have on native wildlife is really, really bad. And it's definitely happening here in Jamaica. So like, for example, I don't know, the ground lizards that we have, they're quite big, they're very colorful,
with the
very
blue
precious. Yes. So they're oh, they're beautiful lizards, and they are found in urban areas. And we've noticed over the years they do have an endangered status because over the years their population is seen to decline. And one of the reasons is because of pets like cats and dogs and other invasive species hunting them down. And I have a few in my garden. And what's funny is that the few I have in my garden, I think I have them because I do not have cats. I have dogs, and I actually try and train my dogs not to catch the lizards in my yard. Like, I try and train them to leave them alone. I don't know how, but I try, and they're pretty good like that. But I remember we had a whole community discussion about ground lizards, and we found that in people who have cats in their yard, or the neighbors have cats, they see no ground lizards around them, which kind of indicates that where there are cats, you know, they are killing off lizard populations, and it is having a huge impact. So it is all kind of those small actions that really do have a great impact. And even in urban areas, it is important to be more conscious of what we can do to try and protect our surrounding wildlife. And yeah, cats are definitely a what do you call it?
A problem. Don't be afraid to say it, Treya. They're a problem. They're a problem.
They are a problem. Yeah.
No, all cat lovers, come at me if you know it's all right. I said it, but somebody had to.
It is difficult. I really wish I had the statistics at the top of my head, but I remember there was a lot of campaigns about it. There still is, and there's a lot of research on it, and it's really, really bad.
I can drop some statistics for you, Treya.
Drop it.
You know, in the US, you know, probably 10, 15 years ago, they did a study, and they estimated that cats are responsible for the death of over 2 billion birds per year in the US alone. And so, you know, when you think of numbers like that, if, you know, imagine 2 billion birds had survived, you know, the bird population would have been doing much better. And it's not just, I don't want to take anything away from cats. Like, you know, they are cat lovers, but a lot of the responsibility goes back to the pet owners themselves. You know, how you manage your pet, whether you have your pet, for example, a cat. It's always a good idea to have your cats as an indoor cat. And I'll share one more story with you as it relates to cats. And these are things you learn in conservation classes and courses over the years. There is a story about a cat called Tibbles back in the 1890s. On an island in New Zealand. There's a lighthouse on this island called Stevens Island in New Zealand. And the lighthouse keeper, it's uninhabited. So there's just this lighthouse, so the keeper is stationed there, and he went with his cat. And that one cat, Tibbles, is believed to be responsible for the extinction of a bird species on that island, a type of small wren, you know? One cat, not a population of cat, but one cat is believed to be responsible for the extinction of the entire, it's a small island. And it wasn't a true species, but a subspecies of wren, but you know, it was unique to that island, Stevens Island in New Zealand. And one cat was responsible for wiping out the entire population in 1 year. And so that again brings into focus the real issue about managing pets. We can look at cases here in Jamaica where we're seeing things like that happening. Let us look at Pedro Keys, for example. Pedro Keys, Dr. Aiken mentioned the Pedro Bank, where we do a lot of conch fishing. There's also 3 tiny little islands down at Pedro Bank called the Pedro Keys. And the middle key is occupied by people, you know. About half the island is covered in shacks, and people live there. And of course, people bring cats, dogs, and so forth. And there are some very important nesting seabirds down there called mass boobies, brown boobies, terns, and so forth. And we have seen serious impact on these populations because of the cats that are down there, because of the rats that are down there, and so forth. So again, it goes back to responsibility as humans. And even at a government level, we can do more in terms of having legislation and enforcement to ensure we can deal with issues like these.
All right. So people think it's not as simple as you think. You might have a pet. There's a lot that has to go into the decision of what kind of pet, how you treat with that pet, how you manage your household, how you allow your pet to interact with others. So many things, people. So believe it or not, wildlife conservation and preservation is an issue that has so many tentacles that we all need to be aware of and pay attention to, and it's a serious thing. As I bring things down, guys, I would like you to maybe big up some of the partners, because it's not a job that you can do alone. This is a job that you have to have partners with who can help you to touch all the different areas, reach all the different things that you can do. So I would like you to just sound out, big up some of the partners who help you guys, work with you guys to help be able to accomplish all of the work that you do and preserve a lot of the species that you have available, and so on and so forth.
Treya, you go ahead first.
Okay. Yeah, we have a lot of amazing partners. First of all, we have certain wildlife facilities and individuals who have, their own private wildlife facilities in the name of conservation, which assist with the rescue and rehabilitation of protected species such as birds, crocodiles, so forth. So with NEPA, we actually have an agreement with some of these facilities where we support them and we work very, very closely with them. Some of these facilities are the Hope Zoo here in Kingston, the Seven Oaks Bird Sanctuary in St. Anne, which is run by Wendy Lee, who's an amazing conservationist and environmental activist. And we have the Jamaica Swamp Safari in Trelawney, and they are actively on the ball looking out for crocodiles and also looking after crocodiles at their facility. And they also contribute towards the Head Start, the Crocodile Head Start program. We have the Holland Bay Crocodile Sanctuary in St. Thomas, which is another amazing project, which is all about the conservation and education of our crocodiles here in Jamaica. And we have the JSPCA here in Kingston. Who else am I leaving off? I think that's it for rescue facilities. And then in terms of just wildlife rescue and response, there are so many entities involved, all of those I just named. And then we have the Caribbean Coastal Area Management Foundation based in Clarendon. And they are the ones who are out there monitoring and patrolling the marine protected areas, the whole Portland Bight protected area. That is their responsibility. And, they do so much for that protected area. It's beyond words. And then the Urban Development Corporation, they're always on the ball in Portmore and the Hellshire area when it comes to wildlife response, especially with crocodiles. And then we have our game wardens stationed around the island, who are individuals who are basically enacted under the Wildlife Protection Act to respond to wildlife and to handle wildlife and enforce the law. And we have those stationed all over the island. Yeah, I think, have I left off anyone?
Oh, well, we will never actually be able to exhaust the entire list, but I'd like to add, like the police, we work so closely with with the Jamaica Constabulary Force. I mean, some years ago, there were blue team police that were dealing with environmental laws. And they've all now been incorporated as one Red Sea Police, but we still work very closely with the police overall in a lot of wildlife enforcement activities. A lot of NGOs, we can think of the Jamaica Conservation Development Trust, who manages the Blue and Jonker Mountains National Park, all the NGOs that are working at these fish sanctuaries. If we talk about Rockabessa, Alligator Head, the Bluefields,
White River.
And so many, there you go. So many other entities and individuals across the island that we work with. We also have international partners. You might know a few of them working with the Iguana Project.
Yeah, the International Iguana Foundation, Fort Worth Zoo, San Diego Zoo. And then we also get support from US Florida Fish and Wildlife. US Fish and Wildlife, yeah. So yeah, the list is extremely long. Yeah.
All right, great, guys. I just have one more thing. I'd like to bring in Alicia from NEPA. That's Alicia Bart, who's the community animator. She's going to share us a little bit about NEPA's role as in our schools, bringing them in to let the youngsters, because you have to make sure that they have a strong appreciation of the natural environment. Let them appreciate what's going on. So, Alicia, can you see? All right, there we go. I see you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Well, yes, so we're celebrating World Wildlife Day, and of course, we do have a lot of programs where the public education branch, they coordinate with the ecosystems branch, with the protected areas branch, legal, the different branches within the organization, really, to undertake the various projects that we do in through, collaboration with the Ministry of Education. So currently we have 4 programs that we undertake on a yearly basis. We have the NEPA Junior Environment Program, where we tackle, or we have courses for teachers island-wide, primary school teachers. This is for the teachers island-wide, and we also go in schools, do presentations as well to the students. We have the National Club and National Environment Club School Program as well, that tackles high school. We have our summer library program that tackles students from age 6 to 13. And we have, at the close to the end of the school year, we speak to, we have our CSEC seminar, where we tackle students who are doing their SBA. So really and truly, so while we have our practical persons, Ricardo and Treya, who goes out in the field and they have the technical knowledge and can come with the niceness about the crocodiles and the birds and everything like that. We at PECCD, we break it down really, and we try to make it understandable on a layman terms, really, because sometimes when you have the technical jargon, sometimes persons don't understand that. So we try our best not to only appeal to, adults to speak about these things, but we try to implement these things in school as well, so children can understand. And when you go into schools as well, and you tell them, no, you're from NEPA, the first thing that they would say, oh, the crocodile people. So they do have some knowledge of what it is. So we try to broaden that knowledge with, other things. So we speak about the crocodile, yes, but we talk about the butterfly as well, giant swallowtail butterfly. We talk about the coney. A lot of persons don't know about the coney. When they see it, the first thing they say is like, that's a rat. And we're like, it's rat cousin, if you want to say that. So we do have various programs. Oh, and we are trying to implement now our early childhood program, where we tackle basic school students, children. So we here at NEPA, we're a big deal. We're doing a lot of things from we're taking it from, you can basically say 3-year-old all the way up to 18. So it is safe to say we're trying to implement programs where persons have a basic understanding of how important wildlife, flora, fauna are, and they can, take it from there. So by the time they reach adulthood, we know we have our environmentalist lock.
So how persons want to link up with you, or maybe have like some NEPA persons come to the schools or come anywhere and give a talk, give a presentation, that kind of thing? How do they reach out to you? What do they call? Who do they talk? So on and so forth.
Definitely. So they can definitely send an email to pubed@nepa.gov.jm. They can also send email to the various coordinators. They can send it to me, alicia.barrett@nepa.gov.jm. They can send it to travis.bartley@nepa.gov.jm as well. So they can also send it to the other coordinator, noreen.johnson@nepa.gov.jm. So it's for the various programs, we have different coordinators, but if they want something general, just send an email to pubed@nepa.gov.jm.
I want to come with a whole heap of niceness and diagram and picture and different something, so them can hold them and feel them and them kind of thing.
All the time. We have a crocodile outline or a replica of what a crocodile should be in our office that we travel with sometimes to the school, so that children, they can feel what it is. So it's not the live thing, but they have a general understanding of what it should be. So we do have different things that we carry to the school to show students.
Here's a free idea. If you want to make money, just make like Treya, just make she bring an alligator and just show how she wrangle them and do all them kind of things. I don't know, just bring like a special alligator. One we're not gonna really bite. I'm just saying, Treya, you're Jamaica's very own crack wrangler. You're a real interesting thing to see. All right, but it's nice. Glad you guys could be here so we could have this nice long conversation about World Wildlife Day. It's really interesting. This conversation went in so many different directions that we never even necessarily considered. And I'm so glad you were here to share all this information, particularly about cats and their impact. All cat lovers, yeah, come see me. I said it. Whatever. You know what I'm saying? But thank you guys for being here. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your knowledge. Keep on doing the good work. Thanks for going out there and trying to foster some understanding about the different animals and so on, especially the animals, because those are the ones that people are afraid of and interact with and so on. So demystifying the different creatures, particular alligators, ones that are feared, thought of as violent, thought of as dangerous.
Sir Vaughn, just to correct you, it's not, we don't have, it's the crocodile, the American crocodile, not the alligator.
Sorry, ma'am. Sorry. My apologies. The American crocodile, right? So, that's thank you for the work that you guys go out there and do, and you demystify the fear, the apprehension that many persons have about the different animals and the way they should interact with them. Thank you for that. Thank you for fostering understanding and promoting real appreciation of what it takes to ensure that our natural environment is sustained and that we have it to enjoy for years, decades, centuries, etc., 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 etc. All right. With that said, I think it's time for us to wrap. Thank you to everyone who tuned into our discussion, especially those of you who sent in your questions and your comments. Thank you so much for those. And if you have a question, feel free to send it in. We can go in afterwards and see if we can get you the right information, put you in contact with the people from NEPA so you can get anything you need to know answered. All right. Now, remember, our audience plays a major part in our show. So if there's anyone in particular you'd like us to have in studio, let us know. We try to have that person in studio as soon as possible. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Jamaica Information Service to see who will be in studio next. And while you're at it, check out NEPA. Them on social media too. And a whole heap of things them go on with all kind of different things about plant, animal. And NEPA does a wide range of things. We're talking about the environmental aspect of things here, but there's so much more that NEPA does we can't really talk about all of that right there. So that's just too long for really going all the different things that NEPA does right here, right now. But all right, do some research, check it out. You will not be disappointed. All right. We do this every week live on Facebook. I've been your host, Vaughn Davis, and this has been Studio 58A Live. Thank you again for joining us, everyone. And please have a wonderful rest of the day. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Take care.